in a midnight rule is to end the year, it prohibit the funding in this bill. I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the recognition. While I agree with the gentleman from Minnesota that the monies from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund should not be diverted from their intended purpose of dredging, I do think it is an overreach for the legislative branch to prohibit the executive branch from even discussing the topic. I do think we are in a position where, looking forward, we ought to allow other branches of government to talk about ideas and concepts so that they can be debated by this body. Additionally, we all know that any proposal put together by the executive branch to expand eligible activities under the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund without first addressing the surplus and dredging backlog issues would not be considered in either House of Congress. So again, I do not believe particularly that the amendment is necessary. But that being said, I do not impose its inclusion in the bill and would yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Minnesota. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Remind me. What purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 18, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Harris of Maryland.
No. Okay. Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Maryland and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would prohibit the use of funds for many of the international projects in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, that's EERE, including the President's plan to spend $600,000 on, quote, sustainable cities, end quote, projects in China and India. My amendment is identical to one I offered last year that was successfully adopted by this chamber. I would also like to congratulate the chairman of the committee for his own action regarding this issue. The chairman's bill reduces funding for EERE by $428 million from last year's level. He makes the hard choices required to address our country's deficit and spending problems. This amendment supports language in the report that accompanied the FY 2012 appropriations bill. In that report, the chairman was able to retain much of last year's amendment by directing the DOE to only fund projects that directly benefit the United States, such as increasing American energy self-sufficiency, furthering United States research efforts, or reducing domestic pollution. Unfortunately, the Department of Energy is failing to follow these clear instructions. Instead, they are choosing to spend money in China and India on foreign sustainable cities projects, even as we borrow money from China to pay our national debt. Mr. Chairman, we must take great care how we spend our constituents' paychecks. I don't believe these projects make the best use of hard-earned taxpayer money. There are greater needs that remain unmet, and a massive federal debt and annual deficit that continues to drag down our entire economy, as was demonstrated in today's Congressional Budget Office report. I urge adoption of the amendment, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Who seeks recognition in opposition? What purpose is the gentleman from...
Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment offered by my colleague from Maryland. The amendment would essentially create an energy renewable program for the U.S.-Israeli program by restricting the EERE international program from dealing with any other country. I certainly am a supporter of the country of Israel, and Israel has a vibrant and cutting-edge clean energy industry, but I do not believe that we ought to limit this program to one country out of many, and think that it would be a mistake to put all of our international program eggs into a single basket. This program, which directly supports the mission of the Department to advance development and deployment of clean energy technologies, needs to be able to establish relationships with multiple partner countries in order to be effective. The program's technical assistance activities help to prime markets for us for clean technologies in major emerging economies. The program can bring home lessons learned from others' experiences to share with the national, state, and local authorities. The program can also promote U.S. national security and potentially reduce price volatility of fossil energy resources by decreasing the influence of oil exporting countries and mitigating world demand for oil. Again, this is an excellent program. I do not believe it ought to be simply limited to one country, and am opposed to the gentleman's amendment and would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Maryland. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Burgess of Texas.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair for the recognition. You know, the passage in this House back in 2007 of the Energy Independence and Security Act was something that has caused a great deal of difficulty across the country. I've heard from tens of thousands of my constituents on how that language will affect their lives, take away consumer choice for what kind of light bulb they use in their home. And you know what, Mr. Chairman, they are exactly right. When the government passed energy efficiency standards in other realms over the years, they never went as far as they did this time. They lowered the standards drastically, and it's now to a point where the technology is honestly years off in making light bulbs that are compliant with the law and actually affordable by the consumer. Light bulb companies have talked about their new bulbs that are compliant with the existing law and that are available now, but at what price? A 4-pack of 100-watt incandescent bulbs in my district cost $2.97 at a hardware store last December 31st. Now a single bulb will cost $20, $30, $40, even $50. Opponents to my amendment say that the 2007 language does not ban the incandescent bulb. Well, that's partly true, but it bans the sale of the 100-watt incandescent bulb, and soon the 60-watt and 45-watt bulbs will follow suit because they cannot meet the energy standards supplied in the underlying legislation. The replacement bulbs are far from economically efficient, if indeed they are energy efficient. But here's the deal. We shouldn't be making these decisions for the American people. Let them decide how much energy they want to consume, how many dollars they want to spend on kilowatt hours every month, not the federal government. A family living paycheck to paycheck can't afford to replace every bulb in their house at $25 a pop, even if it will last them 20 years. Now, this exact amendment was passed last year on this appropriations bill by a voice vote. It was signed into law by President Obama. It allows consumers to continue to have a choice and a say as to what they put in their homes. It's common sense. Let's give some relief to the American family, at least until replacement light bulbs can be marketed at a price that is reasonable. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of its time. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Appreciate that. I would point out to my colleagues that this debate is not about choice or energy efficiency, for that matter. It is about, from my perspective, endangering American jobs, and specifically American manufacturing jobs. We have a significant trade imbalance in this country. Given that American manufacturers have committed to following the law, regardless of whether or not it is enforced, the only benefit to this amendment is to allow foreign manufacturers who may not feel a similar obligation to export non-compliant light bulbs that will not only harm the investments made by U.S. companies, but place at risk U.S. manufacturing jobs associated with making compliant bulbs. Further, I believe it represents a tax increase. It represents an equivalent of a $100 tax on every American family, $16 billion across the nation through increased energy costs. The performance standards for light bulbs were established in the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. At that time, the bill, as I pointed out in an earlier portion of this debate, enjoyed such strong bipartisan support that we were able to override a presidential veto of that act. As far as I'm aware, the issues that inspired this standard have not changed, and I would argue have gotten worse. It is a common misunderstanding that the Energy Independence and Security Act bans the incandescent light bulb and effectively requires people to have the limited choice of only a compact fluorescent bulbs. This is not true, and I would repeat, this is not true, and I would repeat one last time, this is not true. It simply requires that they be more efficient, and I do not see what the harm is in that. Further, while claiming that the incandescent bulb is dead makes for a great soundbite, but it just does not reflect reality, and I am opposed to the gentleman's amendment, and I would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Did the gentleman submit his amendment to the desk?
We got one for you. Okay. I just saw it. So I took it.
Clerk will designate the amendment. We do have it.
Yeah, same.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Tipton of Colorado. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to conduct a survey in which money is included or provided for the benefit of the responder.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to offer an amendment aimed at ending an egregious practice of wasting taxpayer dollars in this time of mounting federal debt. This amendment specifically aims to eliminate the federal government's recent practice of sending out cash to encourage survey responses favorable to agency goals. I wholeheartedly agree with the general need for public input in our government. But the practice of sending out American taxpayer dollars to encourage public participation, or worse, to buy public support, where it might otherwise be lacking, is a symbol of the lack of accountability and how out of touch our federal government has become. For generations, the Bureau of Reclamation has served the western United States well. Its dams, reservoirs, canals, and hydropower turbines have formed the backbone of our communities and provided abundant water and emission-free energy. This was all based on ratepayers paying for almost every cent of these projects at no expense to the taxpayers. Yet that mission is changing, and this couldn't be a better example of just how out of touch the agency has changed under this administration. At issue here is the so-called survey aimed at soliciting local, regional, and national input on the societal need to remove 4 privately owned dams on the Klamath River. The survey was mailed to 1,000 households in California, Oregon, and selected households in the rest of the nation. Each of these households received a postcard telling them that the survey was coming. Then a large packet with the survey arrived. In each packet, a cover letter, a postage-paid return envelope, a survey, and a $2 bill was included to entice the people to respond. That's $22,000 of American taxpayers' money being spent. To those who did not respond but kept the $2 bill anyway, a Federal Express or Priority Mail package was sent out. This was sent to 1,245 people, out of which 286 responded. Each of these 286 respondents was then given $20, which means that $570 of additional taxpayer dollars was spent, not including the cost of the FedEx or Priority Mail. Only the federal government would further reward people for not responding the first time. Let's take a look at some of the responses that the Bureau of Reclamation published in a report earlier this year. Another waste of taxpayer money, said one. No wonder the U.S. is having money problems if the government has extra $2 bills to mail out randomly, said another. Wow, what a waste of time. I have neither the time nor the interest in something I have not a clue about what's happening clear across the country. P.S., they added, thanks for the $2. In all fairness, there were some positive responses, but I think that this comment says it best. Send me no more. Thank you. And that's what this amendment does, Mr. Chairman. It simply prohibits the Bureau of Reclamation and other agencies covered under the legislation from funding a survey in which money is included or provided for the benefit of the responder. It doesn't say that the federal government can't have public input or send out surveys, which is necessary to the process. It simply says no more giving away taxpayer dollars. The above amounts may not seem a lot in this day of trillion-dollar budgets, but it is symbolic of the waste and abuse going on here. To make matters worse, the Bureau of Reclamation has yet to fully answer and comply with the request made months ago by the Natural Resources Chairman Doc Hastings and the Water and Power Subcommittee Chairman Tom McClintock that is aimed at answering the rationale about the survey, the overall cost of this survey, and why tax dollar payers were included. The American people deserve answers. They deserve transparency that apparently this administration will not give. In the interim, however, they deserve to know that their government won't be sending out their hard-earned tax dollars on a dam renewal survey, but by an organization that was once dedicated to building dams. I urge my colleagues to end this blatant waste of taxpayer fraud and abuse by supporting this amendment, and I yield back. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
I would move to
What
strike the
purpose?
last word and indicate that I'd be happy to accept the gentleman's amendment, and I would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the
I
ayes
ask
have
for a
it.
recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I have an amendment at the desk, 396.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. The amounts otherwise provided by this act are revised by reducing the amount made available for atomic energy defense activities, National Nuclear Security Administration weapons activities, and increasing the amount made available for Corps of Engineers Civil Department of the Army operation and maintenance by $52 million.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentlewoman from Texas. What? Point of order is reserved. Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
I thank the chair very much, and I again ask my colleagues to support this amendment, because anyone who's lived near a port understands what the Army Corps of Engineers is going through. We spent our time working with the Corps on this issue of dredging. And every port in the United States, millions of dollars are lost because of the inability of access and the difficulty of making sure that our nation's ports are ready for the increase in business. The Transportation Institute Center for Ports and Waterways indicated analyzing the direct economic effects of channel restrictions and the loss of 1 foot of draft from the Houston Ship Channel as an example. The data was collected from the years 2008 and 2009. The study determined that a direct economic impact of the loss of 1 foot over 2 years amounts to $373 million. this, in fact, is an account that has been authorized as evidenced by the Army Corps, which deals in particular with the Army Department of Army Operations and Maintenance. This infusion is to assist in making sure that jobs are saved and jobs are created. The impacts in the study do not consider other effects that are very real but are extremely difficult to measure, but they can measure what the lack of dredging can bring about. What I would make the argument is that in ports that are competing with world ports, the fact of accessibility is crucial. I'd ask my colleagues to be reminded that we are in the business of creating jobs. It seems ridiculous that we cannot add to an existing account to create jobs to assist in one of the largest ports in the nation, ports along the West Coast, ports along the Gulf, and ports along the East Coast, all ports that are engaged in receiving large vessels that are bringing in goods and large vessels going out with manufactured and other goods from the United States of America. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment.
The gentlewoman yield
I reserve
back.
my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. For what purpose is the gentleman from New
Mr.
Jersey
Chairman,
raised?
I rise to claim time in opposition.
The gentleman continue to reserve his point of order?
Yes, I do.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the gentlewoman's amendment. Mr. Chairman, as I've said many times, I too am concerned about sufficiently maintaining our waterways. These waterways contribute significantly to our national economy by providing a means of cost-efficient cargo transportation. To this end, our bill funds the operations and maintenance accounts at $2.5 billion, an increase of $109 above the President's budget request and $95 million above fiscal year 2012. I would remind the gentlewoman that under the earmark ban, the final bill cannot include funding to a specific project in an amount above the President's budget request. Instead of increasing funding for specific projects, our bill includes additional funding for categories of ongoing projects, including an additional $189 million for navigation dredging, with the final project specifications allocations to be made by the administration. The project my colleague is interested in would be eligible to compete for this additional funding. As an offset, this amendment strikes the funding for the modernization of our nuclear weapons stockpile and its supporting infrastructure. Ensuring adequate funding to maintain our nuclear weapons is my highest priority for our bill. The increases provided in this bill for nuclear security have received strong bipartisan support. This amendment unacceptably strikes funding for both of these priority investments, which are both urgent and overdue. I strongly urge my colleagues to make a defense a priority and to vote no on this amendment. Mr. Chairman, I raise a point of order against the amendment. The amendment proposes to increase an appropriation not authorized by law and therefore is in violation of Clause 2A of Rule 21. Although the original count for the Corps of Engineers Civil Department of Army Operations and Maintenance is unauthorized, it is permitted to remain in the bill pursuant to the provisions of the rule that provided for the consideration of this bill. When an unauthorized appropriation is permitted to remain in the general appropriations bill, an amendment merely changes that amount is in order. But the rules of the House apply a, quote, merely perfecting standard, quote, within quotations, to the items permitted to remain and do not allow the insertion of a new paragraph not part of the original text permitted to remain to increase the figure permitted to remain. I would further say the account continues funding for projects not entirely authorized. The amendment cannot be construed as merely perfecting, and therefore, Mr. Chairman, I ask that the Chair rule the amendment out of order.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order?
Mr. Chairman, I do. I thank the gentleman from New Jersey for his expression. What I would argue is, what are members here to do? I would vigorously disagree that this is an earmark. I believe that there is authorization in particular under operation and maintenance. But the dilemma that the gentleman is making an argument on is whether or not you could increase it versus reducing it. And so what my argument is that this is a general increase to operation and maintenance with no specific tie to indicate that it is an earmark. There is no monetary benefit to myself as a member of Congress, publicly stated on the floor of the House, and therefore this is to increase millions of jobs in America, in ports around America, for an issue that is devastating to ports, and that the Army Corps of Engineers is being overwhelmed, and that is a requirement of dredging. Dredging equals allowing the quality of vessel to increase by tonnage, to bring in and take out goods that Americans have manufactured and goods that Americans are seeking to import with our allies and trading partners. It is to increase jobs. And therefore, I'd make the argument that we are bound by rules that have nothing to do with earmarks if you are, in essence, placing funding into existing accounts to help Americans, all of America, and to build our ports, all of our ports, making them more secure and making them more accessible so that the goods of Americans can go to and fro and that jobs can multiply. If one port alone, by 1 foot of inaccessibility, lack of dredging, loses $373 million, multiply that by the number of major ports in the United States from the east to the southern coastline to the west coast. I'd make the argument that this is an amendment that can stand on its own and should not be subject to a point of order. And I ask my colleagues to support the amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? Chair is prepared to rule. The proponent of an item of appropriation carries the burden of persuasion on the question whether it is supported by an authorization in law. Having reviewed the amendment and entertained argument on the point of order, the Chair is unable to conclude that the item of appropriation in question is authorized by law. For example, some items appropriated in the, quote, operation and maintenance, end quote, account are not modified by the phrase, quote, as authorized by law, end quote. Under the precedents of July 12, 1995 and July 16, 1997, an amendment adding matter at the pending portion of the bill to effect an indirect increase in an unauthorized amount permitted to remain in a portion of the bill already passed in the reading is not, quote, merely perfecting, end quote, for purposes of Clause 2A of Rule 21. The Chair is therefore constrained to sustain the point of order under Clause 2A of Rule 21. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Rohrabacher of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available under this Act may be used for the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My amendment would prevent any funds in this bill from being spent on the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center. Our Department of Energy is using our taxpayer dollars to help China develop their energy systems. This specific expenditure is $37.5 million over 5 years. China should be spending their own money for developing their own energy systems. With the miserable shape of our budget and our economy, the last thing we should be doing is depleting our resources to help the Chinese become more efficient and thus more competitive. We are borrowing money from Communist China, paying interest on that money, and then turning around and subsidizing the development of high-tech manufacturing sectors in China that will take away more American jobs. This is as nutty as it gets. The Department of Energy is helping the Communist Chinese to build electric vehicles. Over the next 20 years, the electric vehicle industry may well be creating 130,000 to up to maybe 350,000 American jobs. And as of 2010, 30,000 Americans are already working in the electrical vehicle and advanced battery industries. Tesla Motors in my state is already doing it. Why are we spending our tax dollars to put these jobs in jeopardy by improving the Chinese ability to build such cars? Why does our government want to ship jobs to China and subsidize the effort? The Clean Energy Research Center also shares American know-how with China in advanced coal technology. The global value of electricity generated using clean coal technologies was $63 billion in 2010. By 2020, it will reach $85 billion. U.S. companies have the potential to capture the global market and can sell American-designed and built technology to China. But if we give the Chinese access to our research now, our lead in this area will be undercut. Why are we undercutting ourselves? Last month, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese companies for unfair trade practices regarding solar panels. 66 Chinese producers were named, which suggests this is a concerted effort to undermine the United States market. In 2011, the U.S. imported over $3 billion worth of Chinese panels, and since 2001, our share of the global market in these panels has shrunk from 27% to just 5%. Over 100,000 American jobs depend directly or indirectly on the success of the U.S. solar industry. Why are we subsidizing the Chinese development of this technology? China is not playing by the same rules that we're playing by. The Office of the National Counterintelligence Executive released a report last year which states Chinese actors are the world's most active and persistent perpetrators of economic espionage. Among the technologies they have the greatest interest in is stealing, and what they're interested in stealing is the cutting-edge energy technologies that we are developing with our expertise. Let's stop paying the Chinese to give them access to our best scientists, research centers, and technology. They are already stealing enough intellectual property to enhance their own economic and military power. They are robbing us blind, but we are not blind. This is happening right in front of our face. America's high-tech industry, whether in energy, aerospace, or any other kind of manufacturing, should be way out in front of the competition. Why are we helping China close that gap? The amendment this amendment would put a stop to over $7 million annually that is being used to bolster the efforts of our Chinese adversary. Transferring technology or funds to help develop that technology to a strategic rival makes no sense whatsoever. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment and put an end to it. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition and to claim time in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly share some of my colleagues' concerns. We should not be sending Department of Energy funding overseas if it doesn't benefit our citizens or undermines our own competitiveness. But we cannot assume that all international cooperation is objectionable. And the research the gentleman's amendment would eliminate is both a proper role for federal funds and directly benefits America. Let me first point out, these research centers are not a donation to China. They are funded in equal parts by China and the United States. They actually support 3 consortia centered in West Virginia University, the University of Michigan, and the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in his own home state. They fund research at 7 American national laboratories, 5 American universities, and 40 American companies, institutes, and other organizations. There's nothing nutty about that, Mr. Chairman. I certainly share the concerns we keep intellectual property and manufacturing here at home. To address these concerns, these research centers signed agreements to protect American intellectual property while allowing us to take advantages of new joint discoveries. Eliminating these centers altogether would harm American researchers, American scientists, American innovation, American job creation, and I oppose his amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
How much time do we still have?
The gentleman has 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, I'll make this very quick. We're not talking about all cooperation. I'm not opposed to all cooperation. I'm opposed to cooperation with the Adolf Hitlers of our day, the people who are murdering Christians and other religious people as we speak. No, we should not be cooperating with that government in developing their technologies, whether it's energy or otherwise. And all of these different groups that are cooperating with them, and this is part of a group that also has research going on throughout our universities in the United States, that makes it even worse, because you have Chinese nationals there who are taking as much of the information as they can and taking it back to China from our universities. We should be opposed to
Gentleman's
this
time
and
has
stand up for the American worker and what's right.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
On that, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings of the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
The request for a recorded vote on the First Amendment offered by the gentleman from Missouri be withdrawn to the end that the chair put the question de novo.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Missouri. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment of the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment. Sorry. The clerk will designate the amendment.
What was the number again?
Did the gentleman submit the amendment to the desk?
Yes, it's Engel 072.
Could the gentleman submit another copy to the desk?
Okay, good.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Engel of New York. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used by the Department of Energy or any other federal agency to lease or purchase new light-duty vehicles for the executive fleet or for any agency's fleet inventory, except in accordance with Presidential Memorandum Federal Fleet Performance dated May 24, 2011.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, and a member opposed will each control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On May 24, 2011, President Obama issued a memorandum on federal fleet performance that requires all new light-duty vehicles in the federal fleet to be alternate fuel vehicles, such as hybrid electric, natural gas, or biofuel, by December 31, 2015. My amendment echoes the presidential memorandum by prohibiting funds in the Energy and Water Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act from being used to lease or purchase new light-duty vehicles except in accord with the President's memorandum. I've introduced a similar amendment to 5 different appropriations bills in the past, including last year's Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, and each time my amendment was accepted and passed by voice vote. My amendments have also been accepted to the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriation Bill for FY 2013 and the Agriculture, Defense, and Homeland Security Appropriations Bills for FY 2012.
Amendment again.
Yes, thank you very, very much. I just want to say before I sit down, that this is truly a bipartisan effort, and I want to pay tribute to my good friend, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, who has been working on me on this open fuel standard. We've introduced Bill H.R. 1687, which requires 50% of new automobiles in 2014, 80% in 2016, and 95% in 2017 to be warranted to operate on non-petroleum fuels, in addition to or instead of petroleum-based fuels. And I want to just say that compliance possibilities include the full array of existing technologies, including flex fuel, natural gas, hydrogen, biodiesel, plug-in electric drive, and fuel cell, and a catch for all new technologies. So I thank the gentleman from New Jersey for accepting this, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, 135, I believe it's.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Stearns of Florida. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this Act may be used by the Department of Energy to subordinate any loan obligation to other financing in violation of Section 1702 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, 42 U.S.C. 16512, or to subordinate any guaranteed obligation to any loan or other debt obligations in violation of Section 609.10 of Title 10 of the Code of Federal Regulations.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you
Chair
very
recognizes
much.
the gentleman from Florida.
I rise to offer an amendment on behalf of myself, Mr. Scalise of Louisiana, Ms. Adams of Florida, and Mr. Brown of Georgia. My colleagues, this simple amendment will prohibit the Department of Energy from using any funds included in this bill to subordinate any loan obligation to other financing in violation of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. That was the original intent of Congress. As chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee's Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation, I've led the investigation into the administration's rushed decision to loan Solyndra, a California-based solar panel manufacturing company, $535 million in taxpayers' money that was ultimately lost. During this investigation, it was uncovered that, shockingly, the Department of Energy knew as early as August 2009 that Solyndra would go bankrupt in September of 2011, but simply proceeded to risk more taxpayers' funds throughout that time. The investigation also discovered that following meetings with outside investors, DOE made the unprecedented decision on December 10, 2010, to subordinate $75 million of taxpayer money so more private capital could be injected into Solyndra. Subordination gave private investors money priority over taxpayers' money, meaning that in the event of bankruptcy, private investors would be paid back before the taxpayers. But Secretary Chu wasn't allowed to subordinate the taxpayers' money. As I mentioned earlier, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 states that DOE loan guarantees are not to be subordinated to other financing, and it was clear what the intent of Congress was. In fact, DOE went out of its way to violate the will of Congress and sought the opinion of outside counsel on the legality of the subordination. And based upon this opinion, they made a decision to subordinate, and it all hinged on the word is, the meaning of the word is. In a 17-page draft memo obtained by the Energy and Commerce Committee's DOE private attorneys, they seem to acknowledge that the law prohibits the subordination of department-guaranteed funds. However, this draft memo was never finalized. Instead, an email was sent by a lawyer at the law firm stating that DOE's rationale for subordination was, quote, "It makes the best possible case on a reasonable interpretation supported by restructuring policy arguments," end quote. Now, Secretary Chu also ignored the important parts of the law. The law required the Energy Secretary to notify the Attorney General in the event of a default on a loan guarantee. In December 13, 2010, letter to Solyndra, Jonathan Silver, then Executive Director of the DOE's loan program, notified Solyndra it was in default. However, Secretary Chu did not alert the Attorney General as required by law. In addition, Treasury and OMB officials' emails clearly indicate they believe DOE's legal justification for placing taxpayers at the back of the line was inconsistent with their interpretation of the law and advised DOE to seek a legal opinion from the Justice Department. On August 17, 2011, email Department of Treasury Secretary, Assistant Secretary of Financial Markets, Mary Miller, sent an email to Jeffrey Zients, Deputy Director of OMB, in which she stated that our legal counsel believes that the statute and the DOE regulations both require that the guaranteed loan should not be subordinated to any loan or any other debt obligation. It is clear, Mr. Chairman, every step of the way the Department of Energy ignored the law and did whatever they wished to push through the subordination. Our investigation continues. I and my colleagues in the Energy and Commerce are working on a permanent legislation solution to ensure that taxpayers are never, ever again struck and stuck paying hundreds of millions of dollars because the Obama administration's risky bets and decision to put taxpayers at the back of the line. I encourage all my colleagues to support this amendment, and I'll yield. I'd like to also get my colleagues, so I'll yield shortly. How much time, Mr. Chairman, do I have left?
30 seconds remain.
If you'll take...
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to support the amendment. I commend the gentleman for his investigations and his conclusion. And I yield back to him.
And I yield the balance to my colleague from Florida, Ms. Adams.
Mr. Speaker, I rise this evening in support of the Adams, Stearns, Scalise, and Brown amendment to ensure the protection of the taxpayer dollars at the Department of Energy. American taxpayers were left out in the cold when the President Obama's administration went through with this loan. The now defunct bankrupt Solyndra was restructured.
Gentleman's time has expired. What purpose the gentlewoman?
Another amendment here.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
You got the win.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like a recorded vote on that.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas rise?
I have an amendment at the desk, amendment number 399.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas. At the end of the bill before the short title, insert the following section. The amounts otherwise provided by this act are revised by reducing the amount made available for atomic energy defense activities, National Nuclear Security Administration weapons activities, and increasing the amount made available for the Corps of Engineers, Civil Department of the Army construction by $10 million.
Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
I thank the chairman very much. Mr. Chairman, this is my Can We All Get Along amendment, and I thank again the chairman and ranking member for their work on this bill. But my amendment would be helpful to the Army Corps of Engineers in their work on our East Coast, on our Gulf, and our West Coast, because it deals specifically with restoration. It sends a strong message to the importance of restoration as an issue of national importance. It talks about the economic well-being of the regions along the nation's coastlines and provides an opportunity for restoration. There is no doubt that over the years our coastlines have deteriorated. Wetlands have not been protected. We've experienced a devastating spill in the Gulf coastline, and so many along that coastline from Florida to Alabama to Louisiana to Texas and in between have experienced a negative impact on their wetlands and their coastline. This takes a mere $10 million, again, I say it with respect, to assist the nation in providing aid and improvement to the nation's coastlines, which again produce opportunities of economic development, tourism, and various protection for a coastline that has suffered under neglect. The United States Army Corps of Engineers estimates that coastlines along the Gulf, 60% are eroding. The coast loses up to 10 feet of shoreline a year, with 225 acres of topsoil washing into the Gulf Coast. Funds are needed to preserve the Gulf Coast as well as other coasts, which will in turn protect the economic stability of that region. Just a few months ago, I introduced H.R. 3710, which would provide for added opportunity for protecting the coastline and as well deficit reduction in the energy security through an energy security fund. The legislation would increase programs or provide funds for programs to help with restoration as it establishes grants for states along our coastal areas, Coastal and Disaster Grant Program and National Grant Program for addressing coastal and ocean disasters, restoration, protection, and maintenance of the coastal areas and oceans. I hope research, including research and programs in coordination with state and local agencies. I look forward to the hearing and passage of that legislation, but today I rise to support the nation's coastal region and provide these resources. With that, I ask my colleagues to support this amendment and reserve my time.
Balance over time. For what purpose is the gentleman from New Jersey?
Decline opposition.
Gentleman's
Time in
recognized
opposition.
for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the gentlewoman's amendment. Share the gentlewoman's support for smart investments in our nation's water resources infrastructure. I well understand the economic benefits of spending money on these needs. I would remind the gentlewoman that under the earmark ban, the final bill cannot include funding to a specific project in an amount above the President's budget request. Instead, the bill includes additional funds for categories of projects with final project-specific allocations to be made by the administration. As an offset, this amendment strikes funding for the modernization of our nuclear weapons stockpile and its supporting infrastructure. For that reason alone, I oppose the bill and urge my colleagues to do so as well and yield the balance of my time to you. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back the balance of the time. What purpose is the gentleman from Texas rise?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would make the point that this is included in this bill on page 3 under construction. I don't view this in particular as an earmark as much as I do in putting resources necessary for the protection of our coastline. Again, it is not excessive. It does not undermine the atomic program. What it does is it helps millions of Americans along the coastline, and particularly those who have experienced deterioration going from the East Coast to the West Coast. And certainly I believe this is one that we can join together and support. It is constructive, it is productive, it creates jobs, it creates an economic engine, and it protects one of our most valued resources, and that is the nation's coastline, wetlands included, and it is compatible with those who are fishing, those who are exploring, and those who are enjoying. And I think it is crucial that this amendment be passed by this House in a constructive way to create jobs and to move this nation forward and preserve the bounty of the environment that we've been given to protect. I ask my colleagues to support the Jackson-Lee Amendment, which deals with the restoration of our coastline.
Gentleman,
I yield back at this time.
Gentlewoman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I ask, Mr. Chairman, for the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas will be postponed. What purpose is the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk I believe is numbered 58.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Mulvaney of South Carolina. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section A. Each amount made available by this Act, other than an amount required to be made available by a provision of law, is hereby reduced by 24%. B, the reduction in subsection A shall not apply to the following accounts. 1, Corps of Engineers, Civil Department of the Army. 2, Department of Energy, Energy Programs, Nuclear Energy. 3, Department of Energy, Energy Programs.
Mr. Chairman, I ask to waive the reading.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to the order of the House today, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when I was campaigning for this job 2 years ago, one of the things that I told folks back home I would do if I ever got here was to try and roll back discretionary spending to 2008 levels. One of the things I've done since I've been here is worked on the Republican Study Committee budgets. We've done 2 of them now that try and make an effort to really get our spending addiction under control and lower our deficits, balance our budget in a reasonable amount of time. And as encouraging as this bill is, and as much work as the committee has done on this particular bill, it doesn't accomplish those things, and that's why I'm here. I also draw attention to the fact that this bill, as much of an improvement as it has made over previous bills, still spends more money than we did last year. The amendment, Mr. Chairman, is fairly simple. I seek to cut $3.1 billion from this expenditure. That represents 9.5%, roughly 10% of the overall bill. However, it only represents about 1/2% of all the discretionary spending. We're spending over $1 trillion in the discretionary budget this year. More importantly, and I think a number of folks back home would like to know, is that it's only 1/6 of 1% of the overall federal expenditures. It's only 1 penny out of every $6 that we spend. It is our effort to try and bring some sanity to the spending side of the equation. It is not an across-the-board cut. We have tried, Mr. Chairman, to be smart and sensible where we've cut these funds, and for that reason we do not cut the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer accounts. We do not cut the NNSA accounts. We do not cut the environmental and other defense activities, non-defense environmental, nuclear waste disposal, nuclear regulatory commission. What we've cut, Mr. Chairman, are things that need to be cut. We've cut federal research on energy efficiency and renewable energy. We propose to cut fossil energy research and development. Yes, a Republican is actually here, Mr. Chairman, arguing that we should get rid of what my colleagues across the aisle would call subsidies for big oil. We're trying to get rid of all of the subsidies. Imagine that, a world where the federal government doesn't actually subsidize energy production in any fashion, but the market takes care of the supply and the demand and the prices for those products. We also get rid of the we cut spending on the Appalachian Regional Commission, the Delta Regional Authority Commission, the Denali Commission, the Northern Border Regional Commission, the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission. Yes, sir, some of those probably are in my district, but goodness gracious, we probably have enough commissions in this government already. Mr. Chairman, this is a reasoned and a sensible approach to try and cut as much spending as we possibly can, especially in light of today's CBO report that says the debt situation, the debt difficulties that we face are even worse than we've been talking about for the last 18 months in this Congress. So for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I ask for the support for this amendment. I ask that my colleagues vote yea. And with that, I yield back the balance. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
I rise to seek opposition to the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment. Our bill already cuts nearly $1 billion from the President's request. We're below 2009 levels. We're actually pretty close to 2008 levels, and the last time I checked, we're in the year 2012. Spending levels for non-security related accounts are brought down by more than $800 million from last year's level. And while difficult trade-offs had to be made to get to that level, our bill did the hard work to balance our highest priorities and serve the nation's most pressing needs. Unfortunately, the amendment proposes an across-the-board cut on many programs, not all programs, as the gentleman from South Carolina states, but on many programs that actually serve pressing needs. Our bill cuts energy efficiency and renewable energy by 24%, but preserves programs that can address gas prices and help keep manufacturing jobs here at home. That's the focus of the bill. Lower gas prices in the future, keep jobs here at home. This amendment would jeopardize those objectives. Our bill funds fossil energy research that ensures a secure domestic supply of electric and lower gas prices in the future. The amendment indiscriminately cuts many of the activities, many programs. Our bill funds science research, which is a key component of keeping America competitive. The amendment would do serious harm to that program. The amendment even cuts funds to the operation to our Strategic Petroleum Reserve, severely curtailing our government's ability to respond to real emergencies. These are not acceptable cuts, and I strongly oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time.
Move to strike
Purposes,
the last
gentleman
word,
from
Mr.
Indiana
Chairman.
rise.
Chairman, appreciate the recognition and rise in strong opposition to the gentleman's amendment. The gentleman, during his debate,